The night my husband Raymond stood up at his own retirement dinner and introduced a woman half my age as his classistic colleague and dear friend. I smiled. I kept that smile on my face for 47 minutes. I counted. I want to tell you about that night. But first, I need to go back a little, because none of it makes sense without the years before it. Raymond and I had been married for 34 years. 34 years of winters in Ontario, of frozen pipes and wet boots by the door, of Sunday roast chickens and the particular kind of silence that settles between two people who have lived long enough together to not need words for everything. We raised our son, our daughter. We buried his mother, then mine. We paid off the house on Birchwood Crescent twice. Once the mortgage, once the roof, after that storm in 2011. We were not a perfect couple. We argued about money when the kids were small, about his drinking for a spell in his early 50s, about where to spend Christmas. But we were a real couple. That was what I believed. He retired from Hargrove & Associates Engineering in March. 31 years with the same firm. His name was on the building directory in the lobby. Raymond Kowalski, Senior Project Manager. I had attended every company Christmas party, shaken the hands of every vice president, brought squares and butter tarts to more retirement send-offs than I could count. I was known there. I was Raymond's wife, and I wore that easily without thinking about it much. The retirement dinner was his firm's doing, a private room at a restaurant in Oakville. Thornberry, they called it, one of those places with cloth napkins folded into swans and wine lists printed on cardstock. About 60 people, his colleagues, a few clients, some friends of ours, our son Brendan and his wife, our daughter Nora. I wore the navy dress I'd bought in December for my cousin's anniversary. I thought I looked nice. Raymond had told me I looked nice. I noticed her when we walked in. She was standing near the bar, and she had that particular way of standing that some younger women have, not nervous, not trying, just there, taking up space like she had every right to it. Tall, dark hair. Maybe 35? Raymond saw her at almost the same moment I did, and something shifted in his face. Something so small and so fast that I almost didn't catch it. But I did catch it. I had been reading that face for 34 years. He introduced her to me about 20 minutes into the evening. Her name was Claudette Renaud. She worked in the Montreal satellite office, he said. They'd collaborated on a major infrastructure project over the past 2 years. He said she was incredibly talented and an absolute force. He said this looking at her, not at me. I shook her hand. I said something polite. She was pleasant enough in that careful way people are when they know more than they're saying. I went and found our daughter Nora near the window, and I said quietly, "Do you know who that woman is?" Nora looked across the room. She pressed her lips together. She said, "No, Mum, should I?" "I don't know," I said, and I truly didn't. Not yet. The speeches started after dinner. His partner Jeffrey went first, then a younger engineer whose name I've already forgotten. Then Raymond himself stood and took the microphone and talked for about 12 minutes. About legacy, about mentorship, about the projects he was most proud of. He was good at speaking. He always had been. Confident without being showy. I had heard him give speeches at weddings, at funerals, at neighborhood association meetings. I knew the way he held himself when he was performing, and the way he held himself when he meant what he was saying. He meant what he was saying when he talked about Claudette Renaud. He mentioned her 3 times in that speech. 3 times by name. He called her his greatest professional collaboration in the last decade. He said, and I remember the exact words, because they lodged somewhere in my chest like a splinter. Some people come into your life at exactly the right moment, and you realize the work you were doing before wasn't the best you were capable of. I kept smiling. I counted the minutes. 47. From the moment she was introduced to me until I excused myself to the washroom and stood at the sink and looked at my own face in the mirror under the lights. I was 62 years old. My hair was silver, and I'd stopped apologizing for it years ago. I had deep lines around my eyes from decades of laughing and squinting in the sun and crying in private. I looked at my face and I thought, you already know. You've known for longer than you think. Our son Brendan had been watching me all evening. He's 31. Works in logistics, has his father's dark eyes and my stubbornness. After the formal part of the evening ended and people began to mill around with their coffees and desserts, he appeared at my elbow. "Mum," he said. "Just that." "Not here," I said. "Okay," he said. But he didn't leave. He stood beside me for the rest of the evening, and I loved him quietly for that. The drive home was 22 minutes. Raymond talked about the speeches. He said Jeffrey had been funnier than expected. He said the salmon had been overdone. He did not mention Claudette Renaud, and neither did I. When we got home, he poured himself a scotch and said he was tired and went upstairs. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, and I stayed there until 2 in the morning. I want to be honest here, because this is my story, and I've already wasted enough years on dishonesty, other people's dishonesty, and my own. My own dishonesty was this. I had seen the signs for months and chosen not to look at them directly. The late nights, he'd always worked late, so that was easy to explain. The new phone, locked with a passcode he'd never used before. I told myself it was about privacy, about work. The way he'd stopped reaching for my hand when we walked somewhere. The way he answered my questions about his week in complete sentences. Now, careful sentences, with beginnings and middles and ends, whereas before he would have just talked at me in half-formed thoughts the way you do when you're comfortable. When you're hiding something, you get precise. I know that now. I started, that night in the kitchen, to think clearly for the first time in perhaps 6 months. Over the following 3 weeks, I was methodical in a way I had never been before. I am not, by nature, a suspicious person. I spent 34 years trusting Raymond because 34 years of evidence had told me I could. But once I decided to look, really look, things came together quickly and in a way that made me feel sick and foolish and very, very tired. I found receipts, a hotel in Montreal twice, a restaurant I didn't recognize. I found emails on the family desktop computer that he apparently forgot we shared. He had always been careless about technology. I found a message from Claudette Renaud that said, among other things, "I keep thinking about what you said at dinner, about the rest of your life looking different." I found his response. "It already does." I did not confront him. Not then. Brendan came for dinner the following Sunday, without his wife because she was visiting her parents. He was quiet through most of the meal, and after I'd cleared the plates, and Raymond had gone to watch the news, Brendan sat across from me at the kitchen table, with his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee and said, "Mum, I need to tell you something." He'd known for 2 months. He'd seen a message on his father's phone by accident. Raymond had left it unlocked on the kitchen counter during a visit, and a notification had come through. Brendan hadn't read more than a few words before he put the phone face down. But he'd seen enough. He'd spent 8 weeks deciding what to do about it and hating himself for every week he waited. "I didn't want to be wrong," he said. His voice was tight in the way men's voices get when they're trying not to break. "And I didn't want to be the one to blow everything up if I was." "You weren't wrong," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "Then, what do you want to do?" And that was when I knew what I was going to do. Not because I'd planned it yet, but because I understood in that moment that I had a choice. I did not have to be the woman who fell apart quietly in her own home. I did not have to swallow this. I had spent 34 years building a life alongside this man, and I had a right to have what I knew acknowledged. Not in private, not in a tearful kitchen conversation that he could reframe later, not in a mediator's office somewhere neutral. He had chosen to humiliate me. He had brought that woman into a room full of the people who knew us both, and he had practically announced it, and no one had said a word to me. I deserved something public, too. The something I chose was the Neighborhood Association's spring fundraising gala. I know that sounds ordinary, but you have to understand what the Birchwood Community Spring Gala meant to Raymond. He had been chair of the organizing committee for 11 years. This was his event. He spent 4 months every year planning it. He knew every person who walked through those doors, our neighbors, our friends of 20-plus years, the people who had attended Brendan's and Nora's school events, who had helped us shovel the driveway after the big storms, who had brought casseroles when my mother died. These were the people whose opinions Raymond cared about most in the world. He had, in fact, spent 34 years performing a particular version of himself for these people. Devoted husband, steady man, pillar of the community. The gala was 6 weeks away. I called a lawyer named Patricia Oduya. She came recommended by a friend, and I retained her services quietly. I gathered everything I had found and documented it properly. I spoke to Brendan twice more and to Nora once, because Nora needed longer to process and I gave her the time she needed. I went about my life. I made Raymond's lunches. I asked about his golf games. I watched him move through our house like a man who believed he had gotten away with something. There is a particular kind of grief in watching someone you loved turn into a person you don't recognize. I want to be careful here because I don't want to perform emotions I didn't feel. The truth is that, by the time I understood the full shape of what Raymond had done, I wasn't heartbroken in the way I might have been at 30 or 40. I was something older than heartbroken. I was disappointed in a way that had no bottom to it, and I was angry in a way that was very quiet and very cold, and, I think, entirely appropriate. I also want to say something about Claudette Renaud, because I've thought about her too. She was not a girl. She was a grown woman who knew, at minimum, that Raymond was married. Whether she knew the full 34 years of it, whether she had feelings for him that she believed were real, I don't know. I have no interest in her feelings. I am only responsible for my own story. The gala was held on a Saturday evening in early May, in the community center on Greystone Avenue, that had been renovated twice since we'd moved to the neighborhood. Raymond had been to 3 planning meetings in the 6 weeks since the retirement dinner. He had rented tables and ordered centerpieces. He had organized the silent auction. He had drafted the evening's program. What he did not know was that he had also agreed, at a committee meeting 2 years prior, that any long-standing member of the organizing team could add a 5-minute community spotlight video to the evening's program. He had signed off on that policy himself. I had been, quietly and without fanfare, a member of that committee for 9 of its 11 years. Brendan helped me with the technical side of things. He spent 2 evenings at the community center with the AV coordinator, a young man named Patrick, who was kind and professional, and asked no questions. The file I gave them was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. It contained no explicit images. It contained only the emails, organized clearly, chronologically, in large enough text to be readable from the back of the room, and a short explanatory paragraph at the beginning that said simply, "These are communications between my husband Raymond Kokolski and Claudette Renaud, spanning 18 months. I think our community deserves to know the man they've been trusting to represent their values." That was it. No music, no narration, no dramatic editing. Just the truth, on a 12-foot screen, in the room where Raymond had spent 11 years being celebrated. I told Nora the night before, she cried. She asked me if I was sure. I told her I was. She asked what she should do at the gala, and I told her she could do whatever felt right to her, and that I would love her exactly the same either way. She came. She sat beside me all evening, and she held my hand during the video, and she didn't look at her father once. The gala itself was exactly as it always was. The room was full by 7:30. There was wine and there were appetizers, and there was a live auction for a Quebec City weekend that someone bid $600 for. Raymond was in his element, greeting people, making rounds, shaking hands. He was wearing the dark charcoal blazer I had given him 2 Christmases ago. My video was third in the program. The room was not entirely quiet when it started. There were still people talking, the ambient noise of a dinner crowd settling. And then, within about 20 seconds, it went completely silent. I was sitting at a table near the left wall with Nora and Brendan and Brendan's wife, Heather, and 2 of our oldest friends, Joan and Larry Thibodeau. Joan reached across the table and took my other hand without saying anything. Larry looked at the screen, and then at Raymond, and then back at the screen and didn't move. Raymond was standing near the back of the room with Jeffrey from his firm, who had come as a guest. I couldn't see Raymond's face from where I was sitting. I heard, from someone near him, a sharp intake of breath. The video ran its 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it ended, the room stayed quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then someone started speaking in a low voice, and then someone else, and then it was the complicated sound of 60 people processing something at once. Raymond left before the evening ended. He didn't speak to me. I don't know what he said to Jeffrey or to anyone else, because I didn't watch him go. I had decided, before the evening started, that I would not watch him leave. I would look forward. A woman named Harriet Beaumont, who has lived 2 streets over for nearly 20 years and who I have never been particularly close to, came and sat beside me later in the evening and said, I'm sorry this happened to you. And I think you were very brave. I told her that I didn't feel brave, that I felt tired. She said, "That's what brave usually feels like." Raymond moved out the following Thursday. He went to a hotel first, and I believe he eventually went to Montreal, though I didn't ask and Brendan didn't tell me more than I needed to know. Patricia Oduya filed the papers in early June. He did not contest them. Our house on Birchwood Crescent is very quiet now. There are mornings when I stand at the kitchen window with my tea, and the absence of him is so physical that it feels like weather, like something the day is made of. I won't pretend that isn't real. 34 years doesn't disappear because it ended badly. But I also want to tell you this. I sleep better. I speak more carefully and honestly with my children than I have in years, because I no longer have to protect them from something I was only half acknowledging myself. I have dinner twice with Joan Thibodeau, and we have talked the way women talk when they stop being careful, and it turns out she has known her own version of this story for longer than I have. I have started taking a watercolor class on Thursday evenings at the community center, the same one on Greystone Avenue. I walk past the room where the gala was held every week. I think about what I want the rest of my life to look like, and for the first time in a long time, the answer doesn't have to include someone else's choices. Raymond spent 34 years in that neighborhood being a certain kind of man. He walked out of that gala, and I remained. I am still here. I still know every person who walks through those doors, and they know me, not as Raymond's wife, not as the woman in the navy dress who kept smiling, but as myself. That, if I'm being honest, is the part I didn't expect to feel so much like freedom.